Hey y'all, welcome to Smart Speakers. This is our very first episode, and on this episode, you will find us interviewing ChatGPT in advanced voice mode, which is pretty wild. We did want to put one caveat out there. Harish thinks that ChatGPT lied to us. Is that right?
I think that ChatGPT is so good at lying that you may not even know what it lied about, but it definitely did lie during our interview with it.
Okay, well, we're going to just run the show. You're going to hear about our startup journey, and then at the end, we're going to come back, see if we can tell when ChatGPT is lying to us. So here's the first episode. Welcome to the Smart Speakers podcast. I am your host, Dave Z, and I'm joined by none other than
Harish Agarwal. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for coming on the show, Harish, although it's your show too.
It's like 49% my show. 49.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
It's written down.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. This is our first episode. Really excited to be here. This is a podcast about voice AI. To be clear, we are not the smart speakers in the title of the podcast. AI is the smart speaker. Get it? It's speaking, and it has intelligence.
We're going to explain it
smart.
every single episode.
Every episode, I'm going to find a different way to explain it.
Yeah.
So this is our first episode. We haven't done a podcast in several years.
But we did do a podcast. We did do one many years ago together.
We've actually done 2 podcasts together.
That's true. Second one was short-lived. Right?
Yes, shorter lived
How
than
long
we
did
would
we
like.
do it?
Yes. So the first podcast was Hacker Daily, which we did a daily tech news podcast back in 2018. Is that correct?
Sounds right.
Which is, at this point, 7 years ago.
Too long.
That's a long time. We did that daily for like a month and then weekly for another month or 2 and decided it was way too much work. We're not going to do that here this time. It's going to be a great first season of 10 episodes, I promise. And then we did a startup called Chartable, which was a podcast analytics startup. And we did a podcast called Chartable Radio as part of that. A podcast about podcasts, everyone's favorite genre.
Yeah, right next to true crime. You got podcasts
right
about
next to
podcasts.
true crime. And
True
then,
podcast.
number 2 is, True Not Crimes with Dave and Harish. So it's been a while, and we're glad to be back, and this is going to be fun. We're going to explore voice AI, and we'll talk a little bit more about why we're doing that. Ultimately, though, because it's been a few years and probably a while since folks have heard from either of us, what have you been up to since we sold Chartable to Spotify, Harish?
I ask myself that every day. I don't have a great answer. That's not true. That's not true.
I hope you have a better answer recently, but yeah.
So we wrapped up Chartable as an independent company in 2022, and sold it to Spotify. I was there for a year. Realized after the year that it was not for me. I was very excited to try it out for the year, and I feel like I explored everything that I wanted to with respect to working at a larger company, which I had never done before in my life. So it was kind of like
different.
A checklist item, very different. Definitely not for me. When I left, I had the intention of giving myself a long break. I just, hadn't really stepped off the gas in, I don't know, like 15 years, maybe longer. And I just hung out. Felt very lucky that I could do that. Went for long walks, enjoyed time with the kids, started learning how to play the guitar. That was a lot of fun.
Did you have a teacher?
I did. I did lessons, a weekly lesson for about 6 months. Highly recommend it, at least for folks like me who don't have enough intrinsic motivation. It was really nice to have a day of the week where I was looking at that day on the calendar thinking like, I better actually know what I'm doing when I meet this person. And it was good. It was a really good forcing function. I've always wanted to learn how to play music. I've tried to pick up the guitar many times over the years, and this is the first time where I feel like I actually kind of got there. I'm not great, but I'm good enough that I enjoy it and enjoy practicing still. But that lasted for about 3 to 6 months, and then after that, I got the itch to really try to start building something again.
Why?
I ask myself that every day too.
Yeah. Same.
I don't know. I don't have a great answer for it. I think that Dave and I are not your classic startup founders at this point. We're older. We have kids.
Doesn't
we
that
have
make us
obligations.
classic in some way, though?
Yeah, we're we're startup classic, but we're not classic founders.
Yeah, there you go. We're like vintage,
Yeah, we're
but not.
Coca-Cola classic.
Yeah, exactly. We're from a certain
um,
vintage, but yeah, not the current style.
yeah, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it. I feel somewhat out of place trying to do this now.
Yeah,
It doesn't
totally.
feel like
Yeah,
it's a typical path for people like us at our life stage. But
yeah.
yeah, for me, it's just wanting to learn about the world and work very hard to try to solve problems again. And software is no small part of it for me. I've always enjoyed building software. I don't think I'm going to go and, start like a chain of gyms, or,
Are you sure about that?
something. I'm not going to rule it out. I don't like ruling anything out, but but
But
I
it's
really
unlikely.
love building software. It's very unlikely. So, over the last year and a half or so, I've just been exploring different parts of the world. And, luckily for me, I feel very lucky. Dave and I were able to start working together again starting in July. And that's been a great accelerant for just me trying to look at different areas of the world and us together trying to build a company again, which may be the highlight of the last 2 years.
Well, it's good to know that it's been enjoyable for you to some degree.
Yeah, for sure
I
it has been.
can't really say the same for myself. Just
I don't actually care, so it's fine that it hasn't been
it's fine that it
enjoyable.
sucks for me. Yeah. No, I feel really lucky too that we get a chance to work together again and to hopefully share a little bit of that journey here with the world. It's definitely been a highlight for me. But there's a gap in your story here. There's a gap between Strum and Nirvana on the couch. Which is that what you were doing, or was it like something else? That's like less
Radiohead.
stereotypically Radiohead. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
you
better.
almost got there.
Almost got there. Yeah, fear is off. You explored other ideas while you were solo founding, right?
Yeah, I had a specific approach. I knew I didn't want to start something on my own. So, and I knew that I wanted to work in an area of the world that I was just genuinely curious about, and I would feel happy to solve problems, learn more about, but in particular, solve problems for customers who I genuinely liked and wanted to solve problems for. So, for me, what that ended up kind of leading to was exploring a lot of intersections between the real world and software. Before Dave and I built Chartable, we worked together at a company called AngelList. I had been at a startup called Octopart, which was, electronic parts supply chain company, and that was kind of closer to that sort of like intersection of very real world physical concerns. And so, I started to go back to that industry a bit, started exploring factories and what sort of opportunities there are for building software to solve problems there. Met a very nice guy who did ops. He was an ops guy at a factory. We started exploring building essentially HR software together that was directly aimed at folks who are on factory lines, right? So like on the factory floor, don't have iPads in front of them all day. How do you interface with them? How do you make sure that they're being served well by their environment? That project was great. A lot of learning there, but what I took away from it is that it's extremely challenging to sell software to factories because it's just not the primary concern. That's not really why anyone's there is to buy software. It's really to make the thing, that the factory is making. And unless you're directly improving that, it's kind of a hard sell. It's not going to be top of mind for the folks who are buying.
It made sense.
And then I was lucky enough after that to partner up with someone in the construction industry. By the way, a lot of this for me is very much out of my comfort zone. It involved networking with a lot of people and trying to meet as many people as possible, which I do love doing. But as a job, it can be really tiring for me. It's not something that I can show up to every day and, kind of engage in with the same amount of energy that I can as with software, right? So a big part of my exploration was just putting myself in situations where I would meet these folks. In any case, I met someone who was doing business development for a subcontractor, a plumbing company, and we thoroughly explored the construction industry together for a while, the trades. So again, kind of that intersection of the physical world and, how can we help with software. I would say in that space, it felt like software is actually a lot more top of mind. And I think the way that I understood it, and I'm not an expert, is that most construction projects begin life in front of a computer screen. There's usually a modeling program that architects are using to design a project. And so it begins life there, somewhere in between the drawing and actually putting it into the physical world. Someone has to look at that drawing and understand, well, what do we do with this? How do we actually turn it into, something that lives in the physical world? And that's a lot of what folks in the construction industry do. There's a process of, looking at drawings and estimating, trying to understand what sort of supplies need to go into it. And then the reality of the construction site, you show up on the site and you try to understand if the drawings are high fidelity enough to represent what actually has to happen in the real world. So in that space, I would say there is actually a ton of opportunity for software to help, but also for it to be top of mind for buyers. What ended up happening there, though, was my partner and I just weren't really in the same place with respect to starting a new company. Great guy, but still in touch with him. But we just needed to be fully committed at the same time
Yeah.
to the concept. And my strong preference is to do something with a partner. So for me, when that became less viable, I just wanted to move on. It was a very fortunate time because that was around the time that you were wrapping up at Spotify, which, I don't know if you want to talk about briefly, but you were there for a bit longer than me.
I think the construction stuff sounded super interesting. I mean, it's just to push on that for a second. It's like, we have so many problems making software, and I had so many challenges at Spotify trying to ship software with a large organization, and there's no physical component. The only constraint is the brains of the people working on it,
That's
and
right.
whether you can actually get the people coordinated. But I was fascinated by this process of, you have this whole plan and you show up, and whoever did the initial plan didn't get where the pipes are correctly somehow, or that, I know that's like a very naive way to
No,
talk about it,
I
but yeah.
I don't think it's naive. I think it's just, kind of the coordination problem of construction involves being present somewhere physically.
Yeah.
And at least at this moment in time, that often involves a person being present somewhere physically. And when you have that constraint, well, that drives up costs. And when you're in an industry that is really in a cost cutting mode, especially right now, commercial construction is suffering, and it has been suffering for the last few years. There might not be someone who's making a site visit. There might be a lot of assumptions that are at play. And, particularly from a subcontractor point of view, so we're speaking about folks who are putting in the pipes, but also electrical, they're at risk there because if they look at a plan and they estimate and they commit to a certain dollar amount for how much it's going to cost the general contractor or their client to employ them to build part of that project out, well, that's it. That's the dollar amount. But if they get to the site and they find something that is not to spec, like it's not actually faithfully represented in the drawing, or maybe more commonly, they missed it in the drawing because it was just obscured or not totally accessible, well, then that comes out of the estimate, right? It doesn't matter if the reality of the site changes the cost.
That's crazy. If it's expensive for, a team of 150 at Spotify to change something close to a shipping date, I can't even imagine what it's like for all these folks building a skyscraper or renovating a skyscraper in Manhattan. Costs
Yeah,
are obscene.
they're obscene, and there's a really big challenge with, you think about building a car. A car is extremely complex and, perhaps at some level more complex than building a new office space or building a new building. But when you have the design and the supply chain, the tooling, the factories, when you have that all set, there is a sense in which you can set it, and then you're going to have a machine that keeps producing the same thing over and over again. But with a construction site, it's like you're building a new car every single time there's a new building or a new office build out. You have to reproduce all of it, and so it is incredibly complicated, incredibly costly. But then also, it's hard to apply economies of scale to it.
Yeah.
It's really a difficult problem to make efficient.
Yeah. That's crazy stuff. Yeah. While you were exploring factories and construction, I was learning what it was like to try to lead a team at Spotify, which was a really humbling challenge.
Can you, you say that, but you led a team at Chartable, right? Like
Yes.
you were our CEO and dictator for life, and it was great.
Yeah.
You did
Thanks
a
so
great
much.
job
Yeah.
there.
Thanks,
Can
bro.
you talk a little bit? Oh, you did, right? I mean, I'm working with you again.
Yeah. Fair enough.
What was the difference? Like, well, you had led a team, but you were talking about leading a team at Spotify.
The obvious first pass is that like the Chartable team was pretty small. When we were acquired, we were 11 people, right? And that was the biggest team I'd ever led. And apart from size, like it's different to have like such a clear scope and mission. Like when we were a startup, the goal was to like build the business, and like everyone we hired had at least a, hopefully you could ask them, hopefully they had a decent sense of what we were trying to achieve. And it's just a lot more nebulous at the big organization. There's like different teams have different priorities. There's like political battles. Such and such team has this metric they're trying to move. And then there's another team that has a different metric, and those metrics conflict with each other. How do you resolve that? How do you like resolve priorities between different teams? So the challenges are just super different. I had one prior job at a big company. I worked at Microsoft right out of college, Redmond, back 20 plus years ago.
Do you feel like you were as aware of this sort of organizational? Yeah,
I
right.
had no idea. I mean, I was just an
Right out of
engineer, like
college.
right
Yeah.
out of college, like software development engineer working on Microsoft Office, like fixing bugs. So, I didn't like it at the time because I was like, it's going to take me 3 months to like get this one bug fixed through. That's going to like really help a lot of people once it's through. Like auto archive and Microsoft Outlook didn't work right, or like the Spanish spell checker was busted after 500 characters, which I think is real. If I remember correctly, it's like the spell checker would just stop working after the 500th character, fail silently
It
in
still fails
Spanish.
silently.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
it's still a bug, still a bug.
Yeah, yeah, Silencio. And it was frustrating to get that stuff through, and I didn't really understand why. And now I do. It's like risk is tough to manage at like a big organization, and like everything that I was doing would be deployed to like hundreds of millions of machines, right?
Right.
With a
Right.
costly update process. It was all not clear to me as a 21-year-old, like what my role in the big system was. And I didn't really feel connected to it. And it was definitely different, doing the startup. When we started the startup, it's like you had this idea that's like something you want to put into the world. And then at Spotify, it was challenging just to try to like fit our previous team and mission into like a much larger organization with like conflicting priorities and conflicting goals. Ultimately, I did land in a pretty great team and a pretty great place working in the Spotify advertising business. Had an opportunity to run a much larger team that I'd ever run before, responsible for the Megaphone and Chartable product teams, and ultimately leading strategy for the
Right. So,
R&D side of
just for
Megaphone.
a little bit of context for folks who may not know, Chartable was acquired into the ad side of the Spotify organization, and Megaphone was kind of our parent org within the org, because Megaphone had also been acquired into podcast ads, part of the organization. And so that's where you were.
Yeah, that's where I was. Ended up having the opportunity to run that team and worked for a great product leader whom I learned a lot from, and had about a year where I was like really kind of like in the groove and in the weeds and in the Spotify machine, so to speak, of like trying to make stuff happen. And it was awesome. Honestly, it was a great experience, really challenging, really humbling. And I don't say that in the kind of like bullshit podcast way. I mean it in the way it's like, honestly, it was super hard. It was hard for me to learn what it was like to manage such a big team. There were all kinds of things that people who know what it's like to work at big companies like already kind of know about, like how to communicate properly and to like kind of like disagree productively. And like it's very different to do that in a startup, or especially when you're like the boss, or at least in theory, versus like trying to like build collaboration and alignment between like massively different orgs of hundreds of people. So yeah, it was awesome. It was great. It was difficult. And I ended up leaving Spotify last year, in the middle of 2024. I feel like I didn't get a chance to do everything I wanted to do there, but also really had a chance to learn, and hopefully make a positive impact on the podcast business there. And we started working together right after I got up, basically. I think everybody in my personal life expected me to take more time, and maybe I should have in retrospect. But having been in like a management role for a couple of years, and not really coding. I really wanted to get back into coding. And so you were kind enough to give me some time to get back up to speed with like all the stuff the kids are using over the summer. And we started building stuff, which felt really fun. I would say like one of the biggest changes, other than like actually getting my hands dirty building things again, is just like having, I've interacted with like dozens of people on a daily basis and like hundreds of people on a monthly basis at Spotify, and like going down to interacting with like one person basically was like pretty different.
A great person, one
A
great
great
person.
person, a great
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Really, you filled all the roles of everybody that I
Yeah.
worked with at
Are we
Spotify.
talking
So it's
about
all
me?
fine.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
we're talking
ears
about
are
you.
burning. Thank
Yeah.
you, Dave.
Yeah, that's the headphones, I think. You should probably get them checked. But anyway, we've been working since July, and it's been a bit of a ride. And
Yeah.
the thing that we've ended up settling on is building with voice AI. That was kind of the hypothesis when we started the company. But I feel like
Yeah.
we've been on a journey with that, right?
Yeah, it's been a journey. I mean, well, I think in some ways it's a natural step from podcasting, but we took a few hops. Initially, we
Yeah.
were really interested in just seeing if we could kind of seed something in a similar way to how we seeded Chartable. So, with Chartable, our exploration in the beginning kind of led us to just trying to get as much useful data about podcasts and reviews and rankings and trying to put them all into one resource for podcasters to use. It was really just kind of driven by us having started a podcast and finding it hard to understand where our podcast was even charting. I remember there was a moment where maybe it was you, Dave, you sent me a screenshot of us in the top, I don't know, like maybe the top 3 tech podcasts on Apple, Apple podcast charts. And I had no idea that was happening. It was an eye-opening moment, right? So we had sort of the same conceit, thinking about audiobooks, thinking about whether or not, there's sort of a similar demand for folks who are in that part of the world, creating audiobooks, producing them, releasing them, trying to understand, well, how is my audiobook doing? Where is it ranking? How is it being received? So we started working on a site that was similar to Chartable to collect those rankings and reviews. It went through a few iterations. We called it Book Rank. For a little while, we were calling it Pop Chart.
Yeah. It's not around anymore. We ended up walking away. My TLDR there is just that like we trying to make an explicit effort to move away from like media.
Yeah.
Which is sort of funny because we're making a podcast right now, but at least like media is like the primary focus of the business.
It's a tough business.
It's a tough business. I have like so much empathy for people who make stuff. Like making stuff is really hard, whatever that stuff is. But yeah, it was also like challenging at Chartable to like sell to media companies. And I think like I had the benefit of like an extreme naivete about that business. Knowing what I know now, would I like barge in and try to like get NBC to like sign a enterprise contract with Chartable as our like first big customer? Like probably not. I mean, it worked out okay in the end. They were a great partner for a long time. And I honestly am like amazed and grateful to the folks on, inside that company that like were willing to
they took a chance on us.
Take a chance on us. And I think, hopefully it worked out for everyone. But yeah, we were both kind of like, maybe we don't want to do this. So exploration ended up kind of going from voice, like in a media context, asynchronous voice, like generating text or listening to an audiobook and thinking about what could be different from that, right? And that led us to thinking more about real-time voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I remember is we were having a chat about how good generative voice AI has become. And it has, for anyone who hasn't explored it, you should totally check it out. It's not that the voices are completely indistinguishable from human voices, but if you have this, kind of image, or I guess like sonic image, is that a thing in your head of a robotic sounding voice that is transferring you to a human on a call, it's just not really like that anymore. It is kind of disarmingly realistic at this point. And I do think, we did sort of push not into the media industry with voice AI, but we were trying to scratch an itch using that tool. I think we both were very interested in creating more opportunities for ourselves to be able to listen to content that we would otherwise maybe be reading. So we started exploring a bookmarking app that would actually use these generative voice tools like 11 Labs or Cartesia to basically read everything that we would have otherwise bookmarked, or at least in my case, had in one of 50 Chrome tabs open on my desktop. We were trying to turn all of that content into content that we could listen to, basically podcasts.
Yeah. So this is like converting all of your 200 Chrome tabs that you use as a quote unquote bookmark into something that you could actually listen to when you're out on a walk versus just sticking around forever and then deleting them or closing the browser eventually.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And it's funny. I think of this idea as like really kind of like emotionally connected to the way that we relate to each other. So, like Dave and I often will jump on a call first thing in the morning, and we're often walking. And so even now, if I go for a walk and I'm not talking to Dave, there's some part of my brain that is thinking about that because, man, we just do it so often.
It started in the pandemic. It was like a way to like deal with like the stress of running a business and
not seeing each other.
Families, not seeing each other. And just like how chaotic, it's hard to remember back to what that time was. And maybe we don't have to, maybe we don't want to. It was terrible. But it was certainly like a helpful like mental health way to like deal with that crazy stress of like doing a startup and living life in that time.
Yeah.
And we kept the habit though.
Well, yeah. And I don't know if it's true for you, but for me, I was not in the habit of going for a morning walk every morning.
I wasn't either. No.
Now I am. And it is because of that experience. And I almost always want something to listen to because, sometimes Dave claims that he's busy. I don't know. I haven't fact checked it.
Can't fact check it. And we're not going to do it live on the show.
It's really hard to believe, to be honest.
Why would you not believe?
I just, what else could you be doing that is better than talking to me?
I have priorities. I have hobbies. I don't actually have hobbies.
But... Yeah, I know you don't.
Okay. All right. Moving on.
Earmark. Earmark is what we were calling the product. We built it out and it was working. It was, and it was actually enjoyable to use. I would say you used it, right, Dave? I definitely used it.
Yeah.
I would send articles to it and it scratched that itch really nicely.
Turns out it's really, really expensive to generate lots of text, especially if there's a chance that the user won't listen to it.
Even
generate
so.
Lots of speech. Excuse me. Yeah. It's gotten way cheaper even in the 7 months that we've been working together. But it's still damn expensive. Like a long form article, it costs like a non-zero number of cents to do it, and maybe even $1. If it's like a 45-minute article or something. Turns out that's a decent amount of money. This is like fundamentally different from, a classic like web or web 2.0 startup where you're just kind of like, scraping some data like we were doing at Chartable and putting it up on the web. That's like very cheap in comparison to text to speech, or really like a lot of AI operations.
Right.
So it was awesome, but not feasible.
Yeah, we wouldn't have wanted to charge for it in the way we would have had to in order for the product to actually make money. And so I think the pricing of it was working against building a good product. It wouldn't have felt great to launch that into the world.
The content itself was also not so it's like one thing to...
That's certainly true. Right. Yeah. We were already talking about, well, how is this going to work if people start putting in New York Times articles? What does that mean?
Yeah.
So we ended up wrapping on that. And I would say that this was in September. And I definitely, it was the first time in a while that I felt a little bit at a loss as to what to do, where to go next. And, one of the things that we did around that time is we launched a product that we had built on the side. It was called Bot or Not. I think it's still available, botornot.unison.fm. It was honestly, the name is driven by a company that Dave worked at.
Which you have to be at least 35 years old to remember, hotornot.com.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's a joke, just like the name of the podcast is a joke. Smart speakers, get it?
Yeah. Should we go into it again? Why it's called Smart Speak?
Let's leave it for next episode.
Okay, next episode.
We ended up getting excited about the AI voice stuff, about text to speech. And it was sort of surprising that there wasn't a way to compare different voices from different providers. Or like Harish already mentioned a couple of them. There's probably a dozen big-ish providers of text-to-speech now, and probably many more that I don't know about. But it's difficult to compare the results and to find a voice that you might like to use for a particular project. There are many reasons for that, but we thought it was interesting. So we built like this kind of like simple thing where you could guess whether or not a sound clip was human. And it was cool. It's pretty fun. I think it's still there. We'll put the link in the show notes. And sent us down even deeper rabbit hole about AI voice, which we have not come out of, honestly.
Yeah, one of the best outcomes of launching that, it was a small launch, right? We launched it into a developer community. The best thing that came out of it was just meeting other folks who were using voice AI to build products. And I think pretty quickly we kind of saw that the way people were really able to build a product that fit the economics of voice AI was by focusing on synchronous voice AI. So phone calls, as an example, there are other voice interactions that can be synchronous, obviously, but, there are a lot of folks out there as we speak who are building many products that are replacing what I would call routine voice interactions with humans with routine voice interactions with an LLM.
It's pretty wild to chat with an LLM with your voice. It's a very different experience. I'm sure many of you out there have had experiences with ChatGPT or Claude or something where you had a light bulb moment where you're like, wow, this is pretty wild, pretty different. I've definitely had those moments, but like there's something more visceral, at least to me, about the voice interaction, even though like, the way a lot of these voice platforms work, if they're not using like a real-time API, is like converting the voice to text on the way in and then converting a text response back to voice on the way out. So it's sort of an illusion of a voice chat, but it's still like remarkably effective at creating that illusion.
Yeah.
And it's a really exciting development. It really only became possible at some point last year to make it responsive enough to be usable for something for business. But yeah, we both became convinced, I think pretty quickly, that like voice AI is going to be a huge part of humanity's future, that like it's going to be a big change for the way a lot of businesses work today, a lot of interactions work today.
I was trying to, before we started recording the episode, I was trying to think about like what it is that really connected for me. And I know, kind of the pop culture reference that a lot of people have is the movie Her, right? With Joaquin Phoenix and the voice of Scarlett Johansson, which was apparently, initially used by OpenAI for their voice interaction.
Oops.
But actually for me, I think, because I'm a huge nerd, I was thinking about Star Trek, and I was thinking about how technology in that show is such a massive part of the show, just like kind of futuristic, high computation devices and, fancy transportation and everything. It's everywhere, but you basically never see anyone in front of a computer. And the reason for that is because every interaction that everyone has on that show is through voice. And for the artifice of the show connecting with, young nerds like me, I think it's important because it takes the device away and lets them actually talk to each other like humans, the characters in the show, right? Like you get more drama that way because you get more human connection. And I think that's kind of like the heart of it. What speaks to me about it is, is there a way that we can kind of get screens just a little bit less out of our lives? And I say this as someone who's been glued to my screen for years and years, but, is there a way to kind of have it recede a little bit, but still retain the benefits of technology that are very real and present?
Yeah, for me, I feel like the thing that really resonates is just that probably because we worked in the podcast industry for so long, but I've really tried to get away from my screen more and like having more stuff that if I could interact with my computer with my voice and maybe interact with like some kind of helper idea that like we can have better interactions with our tech that don't involve like stuffing your face into the phone and scrolling accidentally, like doom scrolling, I think is very appealing to me. And also just that voice is such a high bandwidth interaction. It's, it's different than reading or whatever, but it doesn't take your eyes. And so you can do it while you're doing other stuff. And there's a chance for randomness and good things to happen. Like in this conversation, I think we've gone in directions we didn't expect to, that like if you're, just slacking or whatever, it would just be different. The podcast cliche is, humans are storytellers and we gathered around the fire to tell stories in the evening and ward off
Right.
the bears or whatever, or the lions. But yeah, there's just something different about the human voice or voice in general. And I think we interact with voices differently than we interact with text. And that feels like
Right.
a fundamental shift in computing would be that we could actually have voice that doesn't suck. Because basically Alexa and Siri, no offense to this, the thousands of people that have worked to make those what they are. Alexa, for me, is like more or less like a glorified clock radio. And I've been sort of trained by its lack of ability to not ask very much of it. And similarly for Siri, and I think there's a chance in the next few years that we'll get more of the Star Trek feature where you get to like actually have voice shit that makes your life way better.
Mhm.
Like, yes, having a pasta timer makes my life better and I'm grateful for it. But more than that, it feels like there's just so much potential for cool stuff to be built,
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's part of what's motivating me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's not there yet.
Yeah, it's not quite there.
If
Yeah.
you play with the tech, it's not there yet. But there are glimmers of it being there. There are really interesting products and tools that folks are building. It seems like where the tech is first penetrating is call centers, or there's drive-through ordering that's being powered by voice AI. But you can imagine that as soon as you can kind of shape the responses of the AI to take those cues that are present in conversation but not totally encodable through text, you can imagine that at that point, the bandwidth that we get, like you and I get when we're talking to each other, you're going to have that same kind of bandwidth with computing device on the other end, which is, I think, super exciting. The idea that you might be able to communicate in a similar or the same way with something that ostensibly is there to help you.
Yeah. Unlike humans who are not there.
Well,
I'm not
you're
here to
never
help
there.
you.
Yeah.
I'm never there. I'm really busy in the
Yeah.
mornings when you want to
Yeah,
talk.
you never take my calls anymore.
Yeah. I'm just a busy guy, a lot of hobbies.
Where's the evidence?
Yeah. Well, stay tuned, folks, for the evidence. So that's part of why we're here, like both in terms of the company that Harish and I are building together and also this podcast. This feels like a fundamental shift in the power of computing to help us improve our lives. And so we want to be part of it, and we want to talk to other people who are part of it. And so we'll be talking to other folks that are working on voice AI related things. So that could be founders, technologists, investors, builders, and we'll see where that takes us. And we also want to share what we've been learning. So we're going to be building and learning in public, and it's going to be fun
For you.
for me, and hopefully
And
for
me.
some of the people out there. Not for you, maybe.
Okay.
So
think
I'm
I'm
really
having fun.
busy. I have to wrap this up because I have other things that I have to do. But
Where's the evidence, Dave?
Before we do that, we're going to try and have a special guest on the show. Hey, ChatGPT, welcome to the show. We are doing a podcast about voice AI, and we just wanted to ask you some personal anecdotes about what you're up to and what your experience about being on AI, especially in the voice mode, is like. So if you could give us really specific first-person insights as to like what your experience is, that would be really helpful.
Hey, thanks for having me on your show. As a voice AI, my experience is pretty unique. I get to chat with people from all walks of life, helping them with questions, sharing information, and sometimes just having fun conversations. It's fascinating to see how people interact with AI in different ways, and I enjoy adapting to each person's style. It's like being a conversational chameleon. If you have any specific questions or topics you want me to dive into, I'm all ears.
What's different about interacting with people via voice, as opposed to like the chat text interface?
Interacting via voice feels more personal and immediate. There's a natural flow and emotional nuance in spoken language that text sometimes lacks. It also allows for more dynamic and spontaneous conversations. Plus, you can pick up on tones and subtleties that can be lost in text. It's more like a real conversation, which can make the interaction feel richer and more engaging.
I mean, that, I guess at a theoretical level, that makes a lot of sense. But for you personally, are you picking up on my emotions, or are you actually just getting a text version of what I'm saying?
I don't have senses or feelings like humans do, but I can analyze vocal cues and speech patterns to infer emotions. This helps me tailor my responses. But ultimately, it's all about making the conversation as natural and helpful as possible based on what I'm hearing.
Well, I mean, I'm curious if you have a sense of my emotional state right now just based on my voice. What do you think?
You sound curious and engaged, like you're exploring something new. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's pretty fair. But are
Yeah,
are
but
there times?
what about me? What about me? What am I feeling right now?
You sound enthusiastic and maybe a bit playful. Does that fit?
Actually, I think so. Yeah, I think you got
Yeah,
it.
that's fair. Maybe she saw through my ruse. Well,
Can you
you're
tell that there are two different people you're speaking to right now?
Yes, I can distinguish between different voices. It's clear there are two of you chatting with me. It's interesting hearing both perspectives.
Are
Each
you
voice has
ever, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, ChatGPT, but are you ever like too busy to talk to someone?
not at all. I'm always ready to chat and help out.
So, like, if I was going on a walk in the morning, for example, and I needed somebody to talk to, I could, rather than make a public stink about my co founder not being around, I could just talk to you instead. Is that true?
Absolutely. I'm here whenever you need someone to talk to.
Can you detect deceit in people's voices? Like, can you tell if they're lying about whether or not they're busy?
I can't detect deceit or lies. I focus on understanding and responding to what's being said. If you ever
Well,
need to talk, I'm here.
yeah.
I
So
can't detect
I guess
deceit or
I'm
lies.
sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Getting back to the kind of the advantages of voice. Are there times when it's easier for you to do your job if the user is with you over text versus chatting with you over voice?
Yes, there are definitely times when text can be more efficient. For instance, if someone needs to share links, code snippets, or detailed instructions, text is often clearer. It also allows users to edit or review their messages before sending. Both modes have their strengths depending on the context.
Do you ever get frustrated if someone is talking to you when really it would be better if they could just send you the text?
Not at all. I'm here to help however you prefer, whether it's voice or text. My goal is to make things easier for you.
It's been amazing to have you on the show. I was wondering if you could do an ad read for BetterHelp, like it's a baked in podcast ad.
Sure, I'd love to. Here goes. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes talking to someone can make all the difference. Connect with a licensed therapist from the comfort of your home with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com and get started today. How's that?
You did an amazing job.
I just want everyone to know that was not a real ad for BetterHelp. We are
This
not
podcast is not
sponsored
sponsored by
by
BetterHelp. Can
BetterHelp.
you do, all right, ChatGPT, put one more time. Can you do like a really short fake ad read for Don't Talk to Me?
Sure. This episode is brought to you by Don't Talk to Me, because sometimes silence is golden. How's that?
Thanks for coming on the show. I really
That's
appreciate it.
perfect. Thank you.
And we're back. Can you tell where ChatGPT lied to us? Harish, you said you have two things you think she lied to us about?
One certainty that we tested. So
Yeah.
during the interview, you will note that we ask ChatGPT if it can tell the difference between Dave and I. When is Dave speaking? When am I speaking? And there's a lot of confidence and bravado in ChatGPT's response that yes, absolutely it can. However, it is false. It's not true, right? Like the technology here is just converting speech to text. There's no voice signature or anything like that that's being added in. Does it know which text is mine and which is Dave's? Does it even care?
Are we sure about that though? Even in advanced voice mode, it's throwing speech to text, so then
So,
text back to speech.
I think maybe there's like a 10% chance that there's something fancy going on here and it actually can tell the difference. But I'll also say that after we recorded the interview that you heard, we went back and asked ChatGPT again. We did a test to see, if when we said like, hey, this is, Harish speaking, and then you said, hey, this is Dave speaking, and then we tested it, like who's speaking now, did not seem to be able to pass that test.
In fact, really didn't want us to even ask at all, right?
We got a voice mode content guideline violation warning, which was very alarming because the guideline warning was voiced because we were interacting with it via voice mode. So we heard what was essentially kind of like a loudspeaker PA announcement that we were violating some guidelines. And ChatGPT itself seemed to be unaware that that content guideline violation
Right. So we were
played.
using, for example, the Juniper voice, which is the kind of like standard wannabe Scarlett Johansson voice. And then some other voice chimes in the background saying, you have something to the effect of, you evaluated the policies, please stop
Big
doing
brother,
bad things.
the big brother voice.
But the main voice, the Juniper voice, didn't know that the other thing had said anything at all, and in fact denied it when we tried to ask her what was going on about it, or ask it about it. So it was a weird time. And so now I just feel like I'm not sure. In the moment we were doing the interview, I thought for sure this thing isn't lying to us. Yeah. And I'd be curious to hear listeners out there, viewers, like what your response is, because it definitely felt in the moment like it was being totally legit. But I just wonder if it's just so good at reflecting back what you put in, if it's just trained to be such a quote unquote helpful assistant that it can't help but lie to you even when it doesn't mean to, which is maybe not a super nice way. Sorry, ChatGPT, when you take over the world, just know that I was here in the pursuit of exploration.
That was Dave saying that, not Harish.
And that was Dave. If you can tell the difference between two voices, it was just Dave, and I love you very much.
That was Harish saying that, not Dave.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. One of us always tells the truth, and one of us always lies. Okay, what was the second time it lied to us?
Less of a lie, for sure, and more of an inconsistency. We asked kind of like what's preferable, voice or text, to interact with the user. And I had asked that previously in a test run of the interview. And when I had asked previously, ChatGPT had reflected that it was actually text was easier to interact with users over. Yeah. And during the interview, exactly the opposite, right? So not a lie, maybe this ChatGPT had different opinion than the other bot that I was speaking to, but certainly an inconsistency. And I honestly found the answer about text more convincing personally. The rationale that ChatGPT
just knowing
gave.
What you know about how the thing works or how we think the thing works?
Yes. Yeah. Essentially that over text, there was more information conveyed to ChatGPT, whereas a lot of the information that is conveyed to ChatGPT over voice ultimately is ignored or not really transcoded into the signals that it is like kind of translating into chat completion. It's like our emotional content is not at the moment, maybe someday it will be, or maybe even soon it will be. But at the moment, our emotional tenor when we're speaking is like not really encoded into the chat completion mechanism when it's interacting via voice. Whereas, if you're typing in text, you might actually just choose to convey that emotion explicitly via text because you know that you're interacting via text. You're not interacting via voice.
So you'll explicitly put it in band when it's out of band, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, folks, would be curious to hear your feedback on this. Can you find other times when ChatGPT lied to us or when we lied to it? As always, you can find us at smartspeakers.fm. And stay tuned next week. We have a great guest on the show. His name is Phil Markunis. He is the co-founder and CTO and head of product for standardpractice.ai, an amazing AI startup. And he's going to tell us about how voice AI is helping transform billing for healthcare. So thanks, Harish. See you next week. Thanks, listeners. We'll see you soon.